Okay, super. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start. We're going to talk about the kit of parts chassis within First Robotics. I'm going to give you some history, and I'm going to give you a lot of design details and such with regard to the AM1 4U chassis that we at AndyMark have been providing for the FRC kit of parts. So my background, first of all, I'm a husband, I'm a father of 3 daughters. That's important to me because those 3 daughters all went through First and they were very successful. My youngest daughter just recently graduated high school, so now she's a freshman engineer at Purdue, but they all had a lot of great experiences through First. I thank First for providing them with really great mentors along the way. I've been a First mentor since 1998. I started out as a design mentor on the Technocats Team 45, and I hopped over to Team 3940 back in 2012 when we started that team when my oldest daughter became a freshman in high school. I've been on various FTC and FLL teams, and right now I'm with one other mentor and 3 young ladies, and we have a new FTC team here in downtown Kokomo called Carver Autobatons. Sorry. I was fortunate to win the 2003 Championship Woody Flowers Award back. That was in Houston. That was memorable. And in the fall of 2004, I started and began running AndyMark with my former partner, Mark Coors. Rest in peace, Mark. We're going to talk about history of the kit of parts drivetrain. There's a lot going on there that people might not know. And then the AM1 4U for 2019 and 2020. We're going to talk about the bumpers involved, mounting features, and customizations. And at the end, if you have questions, we can talk about it. We'll leave a few minutes at the end. Or if there's something that popped up during the presentation and you want to let us know, I can answer a question if you put it in chat. So before 2003, there wasn't a kit of parts. That was a problem. There were a lot of teams that really struggled with getting their robot even to move. And they would go up against teams with a lot of resources who did a lot of great things. And the disparity between those teams with a lot of resources and teams without any resources was huge. And that was a problem. And that was actually one of the reasons why we started AndyMark. So First decided to ask the community to help them provide a kit of parts. So there was one in 2003 and 4. It used large plastic helical gears that drove that took a drill motor and at a right angle it drove a wheel. It used this big tube and these large wheels. It was a 4-wheel drive system. It wasn't very, even though it was a kit of parts, it wasn't very competitive. So the teams with these didn't do that well with them. And so there was still a need to make a more competitive kit of parts. So back in the summer of 2004, I was in a meeting amongst a bunch of teams, and First came out to the Midwest and asked what we can do to improve. And one of the things that came out of that meeting was we needed standard gearboxes and a standard kit of parts. So it was a collaborative effort managed by Innovation First, the predecessor to Vex Pro. And also this was the same year that AndyMark started. It used cast aluminum gearboxes with gears on the inside. The gears on the inside of the gearboxes were supplied by AndyMark. This was our first year of business. The wheels were still Skyway wheels, and the sheet metal was 1/8-inch bent up aluminum from IFI. So 2005, 2006, it was essentially the same thing. And those were some of you can see some of the parts there. You can see uniquely the cast aluminum housings. That is a couple iterations before the Tough Box Mini came in. The gears are very similar to the gears now. There's a lot of hex shafting going on here. That was one of the first. That was a novel thing. It was $150 for a gearbox. That was that was a lot of money. The overall reduction was 12.5 to 1, and you could combine these gearboxes. You can put them together. You can get some more gearboxes. Put those gearboxes together. It would give you a very large reduction axle for an arm. Some teams did that. This was really there were no multi-stage planetaries that were designed for first style motors back then. In 2007, we even though we at AndyMark and also IFI, we bid on a gearbox together. BaneBots got the bid for the gearbox. It was a planetary gearbox. There were only 2 that were supplied, and only 1 sim motor drove each gearbox. So the whole drivetrain was driven by 2 sim motors. This was the first year of AndyMark 6-inch wheels with the fancy, very impactful 1.875 bolt circle, and the sheet metal was still provided by IFI, and I don't know if that's true on the bottom one. It's still 2-wheel drive with other wheels. You could drive a chain and drive all the wheels with a chain. 2008, AndyMark, we got the bid. So we would bid on these things back then. We still do. We would bid on the chance of being in the kit of parts chassis. So we got the bid for the Tough Box gearbox within the kit of parts drivetrain, and this gearbox was based on a 2005 gearbox chassis that was the original one, like I mentioned. And we also had a product named the AM gearbox back in 2005. Alternate gear ratios are available just as they are today in the Tough Box Mini. And the kit of parts had a 4-sim drivetrain instead of a 2-sim drivetrain. So we're putting more power into the kit of parts chassis. Again, the wheels were supplied by AndyMark, but the frame back then was supplied by IFI. I think by this time they had Vex branded products. 2009, AndyMark becomes the supplier of the frame. So we got the business for the frame, and in 2009 we called it the C-Base. This had extruded corner connectors, and it had a C channel structure that was a little bit simpler than Vex's S channel structure, or it looked like a question mark if you look at the side of it. I remember the day that first called us and said we were under an NDA at the time with this game, and they called us. They said, we're only going to have 1 wheel available for FRC teams this year. And at the time, we're selling Omni wheels, we're selling Mecanim wheels, we're selling traction wheels with treads, all that stuff. And they said, no, teams aren't going to use those because they're not going to be allowed on robots, but we want you to bid on a slick wheel. So 2009, we had these goofy white traction wheels that were using acetal white molded material over the hub, because we were going to drive on this really slick material they called Regolith. The challenge of the game was to create a low traction interface between the robot and the field, and it was crazy. It was wild. This was the first year inside the kit of parts, we put all the hardware you needed to drive all the wheels. You didn't have to buy extra parts to drive all the wheels. 2010, things did get weird. We had these goofy standoffs that were like, I think 8 or 9 inch standoffs because the chassis now had to go over these huge bumps in the field. Like, what were they, about 16 inches tall, and those risers that let the chassis have enough ground clearance to go over those bumps. We still had Tough Boxes, and we used 8-inch wheels instead of 6-inch wheels. And those 8-inch wheels we still have today listed on AndyMark.com, even though they haven't been a kit of part wheel since almost 10 years. 2011, I think we still had 8-inch wheels on the kit of parts, but we did not have those silly extension risers at the bottom of the chassis. We used a different gearbox this year because first wanted to go fast in 2011. The field was fairly wide open. There was a lot of space during locomotion. So we used a simple box, a single stage reduction, and it was really simple to build. And this was the beginning of the churro, the spacer between the two sides that people use all over the place for things. It was originally called the cross hex nut, and my oldest daughter actually named it the churro. We were at dinner one night, and she thought it looked like a churro, so she named it. And I think since it was 2011, she would have been in 7th grade at the time. 2012, we went back to 6-inch wheels, and you could upgrade. Easy cost upgrade. Oh, I think what this first one means here is we didn't give you as many chains in the kit back then. I think there was we didn't provide as much hardware back then to drive all 6 wheels. This was the first wheel for a what we call a high grip wheel, 2012. But the tread during those years was clear. We didn't put color into the TPU tread on the wheel, so it was a clear, kind of like a foggy clear material over the hub of the wheel. We still use simple box transmissions to drive the chain, and back then it was chain, and it was the same basic frame. The C base was the same basic frame that we've used since 2009. 2013, we're still using the C base. We started using belts, and first over the years they changed the rules of the perimeter of the robot in order to keep the designs and the teams on their toes. So if they keep the same exact perimeter sizing in the rules for the robot, then it makes it easier for the teams just to use the same design they did in the years past. So this is one of those years they decided to make it the maximum size of the chassis smaller, and we were able to put hardware into the chassis or into the kit of parts for all 6 wheels to be powered, as opposed to the year prior. And this was a big deal. We switched from chain to Gates HTD style belts. Gates wanted, over the past 3 or 4 years, Gates was trying to be involved with the kit of parts. They would put belts into the kit of parts for the prior couple of years, but and they wanted the teams to use the belts on the robots, and a few teams were using them, but not very many. So we worked with Gates very closely that summer of 2012, and they put these into the kit of parts, and we got them to work. And some teams, took them years, but some teams said, "Oh, we like chains. We think belts break." But there's other teams that did actual engineering studies, and they proved out that belts are actually more efficient in powertrain efficiency versus chain. So belt was a big deal. We still utilize the 6-inch wheels, the high grip wheels. I think we even made them. We got rid of the cloudy clear material, and we're able to provide different axle locations and different belt sizes within the kit, so a team can make a wide or a square or a long style of kit chassis. The key there was Gates provided the different lengths of the belts in order to make that happen. This was also the debut of the Tough Box Mini gearbox that drove everything, and that has been the kit of parts gearbox as we work up through today's drive chassis. In 2014, we switched over from calling this thing the kit of parts drive to the AM1 for you. So in 2004, we wanted this to be branded as a chassis for everybody. So it's one for you, one for you, one for you. So that's why we named it that way. Some people say it's the AM14U, and they can call it that, but that's not what we call it. It's the AM1 for you. It was all sheet metal and extrusion design, and it was a different design compared to the C-base. Some people didn't like it. Some people still use the C-base, and they would buy the C-base from us because they didn't like this change. For this year in 2014, we switched to a 4-inch wheel. There was nothing on the field in 2014 that was a bump that you had to drive over. It was a very flat field, and so we had a 4-inch wheel as the kit of parts wheel, and we used Gates belts. But also with this chassis, you could use. This is one of the reasons why we changed it. We could use different size wheels and shifting gearboxes and mecanum wheels a lot easier than what we had on the C-base. We had more churros involved with spacing between the outside plate and the inside plate, and also used churros across the two modules on the sides. Notice on the ends were open on the drive chassis modules. There is sheet metal between the two modules, but the ends were open. That was probably the biggest complaint from 2014 from our customers. So in 2015, we fixed that. We took a piece of sheet metal and went all the way across. The side plates were somewhat the same, but because of that revision, we named it the AM1 for you 2. And it was similar to the original AM1 for you, but the front and back rails were improved. We also heard a lot of people that wanted a flat flange on the top so they can mount things up from that flat instead of a vertical piece. But you can still mount all kinds of things to this. We even put mounting holes in for a Bainbots gearbox to directly drive mecanum wheels on the corners. It was more robust and it had more stiffening brackets, and we just listened to our customers and made those improvements. The 2016-2018 chassis was a slight improvement over the AM1 for you 2, but it was enough that we thought it needed a rev, so it became an AM1 for you 3. Better mounting for the Tough Box Micro, which is a single sim motor or a single motor Tough Box, and it made mecanum wheel solutions even better. And it also included more bumper mounting solutions. So we put more hardware into this kit for bumper mounting. That was a big deal because we think we solved the kit of parts chassis issue, and now it's harder for teams. Well, it was still always hard for teams to make standard bumpers. That's one of the last things that teams have to do to get through inspections at many events. And so we've worked at making bumper mounting as easy as it can get. And in 2015, we had bumps on the field that were a surprise to us. And so we brought 6-inch wheels back in 2016. And at that time also, I think one of the main reasons why we went to a version 3 was we actually added pneumatic wheels and eight-wheel drive options within this chassis and other types of upgrades that the previous version didn't have allowances for. And then 2019, we now are at the chassis that was our standard chassis for this past year. It's the AM1 for you 4. The big difference there was we flipped the flanges around on the outside plates or outside rails. And the main purpose of that was to allow for better bumper mounting. This was probably the biggest change since 2015, and it allows people to get to their wheels and spacers. It allows them to mount those easier, and it you don't have bolt heads protruding outside the sides of the robot. So bumper mounting, it does become easier. No more bumper pocketing needed on the wood to avoid the chassis hardware So less gaps between your bumper and your rail, because that's a point of contention with inspectors. You can usually have about a 1/4 inch gap between your rail and your bumper. More than that, then it's too much. The compromise or the trade-off there was the inner rail distance, or the entire pocket of the belly pan shrunk by 1 inch. So we took up a little bit more real estate on the side modules, but I think it was for the better. We had a new 2-inch by 2-inch 1/4-20 grid on the outside plates, so you could use access holes or mounting holes on planned locations, and that you could use that mounting pattern if you wanted to. Some of the other things with regard to improvements on the AM1FU4 was we had a vertical battery mount. The previous version, we had a laid down horizontal battery that mounted on the end of the robot, and this had a hook and strap thing to hold the battery in place, and also I think for the first time it had a mounting hole to mount the robot side of the SB50 connector, so that the battery would just plug into it and you're plugging into something that's rigid. We still included bumper hardware into every chassis, and we had the identical hardware for powertrain as the AM1FU3, same belts, same gearboxes. A big change for the AM1FU4 was bumpers, and we've learned that people in first, if you change something on them, they have to relearn it, and that's sometimes hard. So a lot of these changes that we implemented one for you for, people didn't understand how to use some of this stuff, and that's an us thing. We might not have made our assembly instructions as clear as they should be. Maybe we should have labeled things better. I don't know, but people didn't understand what those brackets did, and so we've done a better job over the past year to make our assembly instructions and such better. So we have there's a couple pictures down here. This is a front bumper, this is a side bumper, and people didn't understand that. If they put the front bumper on the side, it would actually create too big of a gap between the bumpers and the rail. We still put enough hardware in the AM1FU4. We still did this past year to put on 2 full sets of bumpers, and the instructions were basic, but we just encourage people to make sure you read the instructions. I get it. People don't always do that, so they'll call us or they'll put it on. And I remember I was an inspector in Knoxville at the Smoky Mountain Regional, and there were teams that were complaining to me that our bumper brackets didn't work. And like, okay, right here is how we tell you how to use them. You're not using them right, but I'm not totally blaming them. We're just not getting the message across. So it's a lesson as a designer or as a company. If you make a good product, you still have to communicate how it's used properly. You can't just assume they're going to read the instructions. You got to do multiple things to make sure they use the products as intended. So let's talk about bumpers. The minimum, according to the last couple of years worth of rules, there's a minimum length of 6 inches that teams have to have bumpers to cover their corners of their robot. And so this is about the minimum you could do. I don't really recommend doing this for your robot. I prefer a bumper setup that's the entire length of the robot, or the entire perimeter of the robot, unless you need like an intake to pick up a ball or something like that. And then in that case, you have a gap in the front of your robot. So teams would then cut this front rail here, and then they would put something else in here to bridge the 2 side modules together. In this case, we do have a cross member here that is a standard part in AndyMark that works pretty well. One of the things I look for, I do a lot of robot inspecting at a lot of different events wherever I go. And the first thing I look for on teams' robots, no matter if they're using an AM1FU4 or some other chassis, is this bumper or this length of their frame right here. If it's less than 6 inches, then that's usually, well, historically that has been against the robot rules. Robot rules are written so that this length has to be at least 6 inches. So many times if it's close, I'll just pull out a dollar bill, which is 6 inches long, and I'll put it there and I'll say, oh, okay, that needs to be a little bit longer. Here's the rule, whatever. So this chassis allows for that. You just got to cut this piece down to 6 inches. In order to mount bumpers, there's 10-inch clearance holes on top of the surfaces of the AM1FU4. There's 1-inch holes along the rails, and there are half-inch pitch along the front and the back, and then the pitch between the depth of the two holes in the front and the back is 1 inch. So there's a lot of holes you can use to mount stuff. So you can use those standard brackets to put them in a lot of different places. There's not just one place. In order to make the well, I mentioned one of the improvements of the chassis was to mount these, to have these mounting holes, these 2x2 patterned 1/4-20 clearance holes. Some teams were asking for that. A lot of teams mount things on the inside of that plate and they go up from there. So those holes were an improvement over the past design. Oh, also notice those holes are mounting holes that exist on the inside and the outside rail of each of the modules. So you can put churros wherever you want them to be, or you can put hinges or brackets or structure coming up from there, however you want to design it. One of the great things about the AM1FU4 that the teams take advantage of is what we call customizations, but they're using standard parts to make this chassis different than what comes in their blue box as their kit of parts chassis. They can do a lot of different things. They can do 8-wheel drive, pneumatic, mecanum. They can do a different type of wheel. They can have an omni wheel on the corners. They can have performance wheels or higher traction wheels. They can use different companies, brands of wheels to put in there. And this thing is fairly modular in order to do that. Also different gearboxes. They can put shifters on here. It's very what we call customizable, even though those are standard off-the-shelf parts they're using with this chassis. So this picture shows an 8-wheel drive system. And on my team, I work on Cybertooth as a technical mentor. This is what we've used the last, I think, at least the last 2 years. I think it might have been the last 3 years. We've been using 6-inch wheels, 8-wheel drive. The team would add 2 wheels to the chassis and add different sized belts to the chassis. And there's a product package that we have at AndyMark that identifies those items. Another customization is to use mecanum wheels. You can use 6-inch wheels, 4-inch wheels, and also 8-inch wheels if you want. There's room in there to make that work. The 8-inch wheels are wider, so I think there's some different spacing between the rails that you have to make it wider for that, but it works. This standard uses the Tough Box Micro gearboxes. You can kind of see them on this drawing right there. Each one has its own gearbox. Each one would have its own motor, be it a Sim or a Neo or a Falcon or whatever. You can also buy a kit. We have kits that give you a front opening, and it gives you these brackets and this cross member, and there's kits to make it wider. And people have asked for this, so we put together a standard kit for it. Pneumatic tires, depending on the game, pneumatic tires are sometimes very popular. Back in 2016, we could not keep enough pneumatic tires in stock because of strongholds, defenses that you had to climb over and drive over in order to get points. So this is an upgrade kit to the AM1FU4 for pneumatic tires. We have We have 8-inch and 6-inch and 8-inch HD versions of these things. So a lot of teams use these, and it provides a lot more, I guess, shock absorbent capability for the chassis, because now there's compliance. There's a lot of compliance within pneumatic tires compared to a high grip wheel. What is that one? Oh, that's an 8-inch. Sorry, that's an 8-wheel drive, 6-inch pneumatic pneumatic setup for the chassis. It's kind of hard to see some of these. The drawing isn't very good. Sorry about that. But those are different options that you can use, and these are all on our website. So there's shifters that you can add to it. There's all kinds of different customizations that we put into bundles that people want to use. And I think this is probably one of the most underutilized things that teams might not realize. I don't see many teams with 8-wheel drive systems. Probably the biggest complaint that we get from veteran teams about the chassis is it rocks too much. It has the drop center wheel and it rocks. So if they're trying to use vision, or they're trying to shoot something, or they're targeting something, and their arm might move, or someone hits them, the robot will rock a little bit because that center 2 wheels are dropped. And that all can be fixed if they just add 2 more wheels and make it an 8-wheel drive, and it doesn't rock as much at all, depending on your center of gravity, if you have 8 wheels versus 6 wheels. Some teams, there's a lot of teams that use our chassis, not necessarily for their competition robot. So I know of veteran teams, like world championship veteran teams, who still use our chassis, and they still get it in their kit of parts, but they don't show up at their regional or their district event with that chassis as their competitive chassis. They have their own design. They want to use their own design. They believe it's better than the kit of parts chassis, and good for them. That's fine. But they use our chassis to train their new students on how to build something. They might make a defensive robot, or they actually have a big enough team where they train their students, their younger students, how to work with a kit of parts chassis, and then those students go out and help the younger, lower resource teams at an event, and they can help debug their robot to make them more competitive on the field, because they're probably our alliance partners with the high resource team that owns the chassis that they don't use on their robot. Also, a big deal that teams might not realize is this saves time and money and all kinds of other resources if they're working within the typical build season of a FRC challenge. Right now, because of COVID, it is build season right now. It has been since January of this past year. So this doesn't apply to this year. But as we go forward the future years, you still have, I bet first is still going to give us a limited amount of time, limited amount of resources to build these robots, to play these games. And if you have a chassis that's already designed for you and you can upgrade it how you want it with some simple bundles from us, it saves you time and money allocation on the bill of material, depending on what FIRST does with that limit on the bill of material pricing of the parts that you use on your bill of material. Probably the biggest thing there, it just saves time to get your robot built. So I do want to thank Nick Lawrence. Nick is a designer here at AndyMark, and he put together this presentation. I've tweaked it a lot, but he did a similar presentation recently, probably within the past year. So most of the content that is put together is thanks to Nick. So thanks to him. Thanks for you guys for listening. What kind of questions do you have?
We have plenty of time for questions. I think there's about 13 participants on here. We had at least one comment in the chat, so feel free, just unmute yourselves, ask questions. If you're not comfortable with that, you can put it in the chat and I will relay it.
And it can be drive base related, kit parts chassis related. If you want an old story from when some of these were developed, there's all kinds of stories with how some of these drive chassis were developed.
Yeah, I do have one question. What's the difference between the 8 HD version of the pneumatic wheels and the normal version?
Yeah, good question. So the normal version uses a plastic polycarbonate hub. I'm going to try to pull up wheels. Oops. Pneumatic. So the standard version of each wheel uses a plastic polycarbonate hub like this wheel here. And those hubs are very durable. We don't see broken versions of these hubs because of the compliance and durability of the tire and the tube. It's pretty rock solid. But some teams are more conservative and they want to make sure the wheel hubs don't break. And so they use an HD wheel, and that is an aluminum billet, an aluminum hub versus the polycarbonate hub. And I think there's different versions of the bore. That's another advantage with the HD. You can have a hex bore or you can have a bearing bore, whereas the polycarbonate hub doesn't have any other types of bores. They're both, I think the only option with the polycarbonate core bore is a bearing bore. Good question.
Another question about that. Would you recommend that for like a shooter if you were to like have really low pressure in it? Could that be used as like a shooter wheel or whatever?
Yeah, it can. A lot of teams used this type of wheel either from us or other vendors back in 2013 when they were shooting the Frisbee discs. They would pick up 3 or 4 discs. They would spin their shooter up really fast with a wheel. In this case, you're asking about a pneumatic wheel, and they would shoot it out the front. The problem came up where the pneumatic wheels with the inner tubes with the stems were actually out of balance. A little metal stem that comes out is a problem when you're spinning at very high RPMs. It's not a problem when you're driving your robot. It is a problem like on your car. On your wheels on your automobile have to be balanced when they put new tires on because the stem, also just irregularities in the wheel. A technician will put a little weight on your rim so it balances the wheel. Same thing happened with the teams in 2013 when they used these as shooting wheels. You have to either balance the wheel by putting, I noticed people putting washers or extra nuts on some of the sandwiching bolts to offset the balance of the valve stem. Another thing they did was they got rid of the inner tube. They put in a pool noodle inside of the pneumatic tire, and that worked instead because the pool noodle was balanced uniformly anyway, as long as the gap where they met it together wasn't too big. A lot more information that you asked for. Sorry, but that brought up some good memories.
Andy, can you hear me? Andy, are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, first off, no, that's exactly what we're looking for is that information. Both Todd and I just jumped into this room and we're like, yes, this is what we want to hear. A couple things. We've used the 6-inch high performance wheels the last couple of years with the 1/2-inch hex. I think one of the greatest wheels that have come out in the last few years. The tread, I love being able to pick the different tread. Obviously, we use blue nitrile on there, and then we anchor it down with some rivets, some pop rivets. Do you see that being the best way, or do you see teams using adhesive at all with that?
Oh gosh.
And then I want to do one more question before you, and then you can answer both of them. The second one will be on mechanism wheels. We're seeing a lot of the intakes go to 2.25 inch mechanism wheels. Are
Yep.
we going to see that come out in product in the next season or so?
Good question. Okay, so two questions. First question was about what's the best way to mount a tread to a performance wheel. Second question we're going to get into is development of wheels for Mecanum. So, gosh, there's been many different ways to put on tread and attach tread to a 6-inch performance or any kind of performance wheel. People really like these wheels. They're super robust. I think the only year that we've ever seen any kind of damage to this type of wheel was 2000. Gosh, I get my years mixed up. But 2000, I guess it was 2019 when people would jump onto the stage 2, a tier 2 platform, and they would sometimes dent these wheels because the robots like launched themselves like Dukes of Hazzard cars into the second level of the. Gosh, I forget the names of those things. But anyway, so to answer your question though, I think personally, I think rivets are the way to go. I've never had success putting treads on with an adhesive. There's so much different types of forces that happen on the tread to the wheel. You don't want them to fall off during an event, during a match, but then when the tread wears down, you got to get them off to put a new tread on, because that tread, the advantage of the tread, the blue nitrile or natural rubber wedge top or whatever you're using, the advantage is it has very high traction, and very high traction, the trade-off of that is it does wear down even after maybe an entire event of maybe 20 matches. It wears down enough where you want to put on new tread. So putting putting the best adhesive on there is not what you want to do, because you want to get the tread off. So riveting them on, I think, is the way to go. For a few years, we had a method where we were zip tying. We were cutting a slot in the perimeter of the tread. We would pull tabs through, and then we would zip tie those tabs to the bore or the inside of the wheel, and that still didn't work very well. So right now, we actually sell kits that have hose clamps. So that you put a hose clamp over the entire tread and the wheel, get it in place, clamp it down really nice and tight, and then drill your holes for your rivets. And as long as you use rivet heads that are protruding, they're not protruding outside of the tread itself. So make sure your rivet heads are down set into the tread. And maybe sometimes you even can, if it's not working right, you can cut away a little bit of the tread around that hole. But inspectors don't want metal rivets contacting and driving on or digging into the carpet on the playing field. So make sure your rivets are below the surface of the outside of the tread on your wheel. With regard to Mecanum wheel, gosh, we've been working on small 2-inch, 2.5, 2.25-inch Mecanum wheels. We moved to this new building 2 years ago, and we were working on those years prior. So probably 4 years now, we've been working on a small Mecanum wheel, and we don't have one released yet. The problem up to this point has been the way we want to design the wheel is our costs have been too high, and we haven't wanted to invest money into a wheel that really provides a product price that is 2 to 3 times higher than other wheels in the market. Granted, it's not the same exact wheel that others are providing in the market. So we have been working on this wheel. We've been trying to find ways to manufacture the parts to make them less expensive. We have been looking at some international sourcing options, and there's a pretty strong chance we're going to come up with a small Mecanum wheel over the next year. I'm not going to say exactly what's going to happen. I want to keep my cards a little bit close to my chest here on that. But we know that's a need. We know it's something we want to work on, and we have been putting resources toward that. But Alex, yeah, thanks for the question. Any other questions?
We do have a few more minutes if anybody else wants to jump in. These have been good questions. This is not my area of expertise, but it's fascinating. Really appreciate this.
Well, I'm going to jump in a little bit here, Andy. Again, this is Alex Urick from 4607. I think the biggest plus in all of this is we joined FRC as a team in 2013 to see how the AM14 or the AMU chassis all developed. It's a good eye opener just to see those iterations come forward, as well as just the honest feedback on the mechanical wheel, knowing what to expect and how companies go about deciding what's going to be put out there. So I do appreciate that. Thank you so much to Andy Baker for joining us today.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Alex. Oh, one of the things I tell you, it's hard. I mean, in our market right now, well, in any market right now, it's tough. I mean, this market, because of COVID, it's hard to keep your company going and keep people doing the things they want to do within your company. One of the difficulties we've had from a designer standpoint, and I'm still a designer. My background is mechanical design. I've done probably 15 to 20,000 hours of CAD in my life, so I do a lot of CAD, and our designers want to design new products. If we let them, they would design new products all day long, for focusing on first, and they that's what they want to do. That's what they hired in here to AndyMark to do. But we also we're a small enough company that we also those people have to also work in operations. They also have to make sure that other customers that we depend on for revenue are taken care of. So we would like, if we had no financial burdens of inventory and resources, we would design new products all day long, every day. But the realities of things, of like for instance, the designers of our recent FLL tables, which we're starting to sell these robot competition tables that are great for FLL. The designers of those are the ones that are doing a lot of the manufacturing. They're running the router, they're running the drill jig that we designed to drill the side holes. And they're like, yesterday, the same people that designed it are the same people that packed 36 tables yesterday for customers to come get them, or for us to ship them out. So I wish we were big enough that we could have designers only do design work all the time, and that's what they want to do. But at the same time, they got to help things get it. We're still a small business, and we have to use those resources to help get parts out the door. So that's a challenge that we're juggling right now. Is we don't have as much staff as we can't afford as much staff as we used to have. But my goal is to make sure that those people that are on staff now maintain these positions throughout the time that we still have COVID in place. So as a designer, like I said, it's a difficult time because you don't get to spend all your time being a designer, especially at a small company like us. Does that make sense?
No, that makes complete sense. I understand the balance. I think a lot of the mentors that have been around FRC long enough understand that as well. Even if you run your own team, understanding the balance between, okay, we want to put this great product in the field, but we also need money coming in, so we need a strong business marketing team. And I'm going to put a plug in for you. 4607 has this giant cabinet, 4 foot by 4 foot by 2 feet deep. And it's just loaded full of wheels. It's our wheel cabinet. And when people come in, we always show them the wheel cabinet. And we have a ton of the compliant wheels. We absolutely love the compliant wheels for everything. Kids are trying to make a drivetrain that's based on that, which I think is ridiculous. But so for those teams that are out there, like, we got our $4,000 back from our second regional. And we sat down with the mentors and said, what are we going to do with this? And my first thought was, let's just buy as much product as we can that we know we're going to use. So we restocked our wheel cabinet, and we just got a bunch of new acetal spacers in and bearings and everything else. But that's what we decided to do, knowing that, it might not be the best competition season. This is the best time to, number one, help the distributors out, but also when it comes to prototyping, it is absolutely horrendous trying to use the wrong wheels for your prototype, or not having enough bearings around to lock everything together. So for those teams that are out there, I do encourage them to look at taking some of your money and buying those things you're going to use, compliant wheels and the competition wheels, that sort of thing. So thanks for all you do, Andy. We do appreciate it. It's awesome having you here today again. And for those that also helped with you, again, greatly appreciated.
Well, you're welcome, Alex, and thank you all for inviting me. I've been invited many times to come up to Minnesota for the in-person jump starts, and I really do want to get up there next year. So please,
hey,
yeah.
You may be writing a check that it's hard to cash at some point, but no, this is honestly, Andy, if this is the way it goes, where you can showcase your product at home, and Todd and I talked about this at length, this might be the best avenue for us to reach out to you and have you with your team on your showroom floor, on your factory floor there, showcasing the product. That would be huge, because a lot of teams that we have in our area, they scroll through the pages and they're like, well, okay, I really don't understand how this works. It looks cool, but what is it going to do for me? And we don't have a lot of time commitments from the kids to go through and research all of this stuff. So if we could have, one of the things that we're envisioning is having the AndyMark room where literally one session after the other, you're showcasing your equipment. And I think that would be a great value to, yeah. And there was, yep. So it'd be great value for your customers and for us just to see how this stuff all rolls out. So yeah, no, we'd love to have you up. I've seen how you guys travel. You guys have an awesome crate that you fold up together. But yeah, I think we'd find more value out of you as staying in Indiana and doing it this way. I think that'd be awesome. So, but if you want to come to Minnesota, it's nice and warm right now. This year.
I haven't come up. The only time I've been up there for a first style event, this is, well, no, two trips recently I went to was the last one I was up there was for the bot shot event that took place in Minneapolis. That was right after Mark had his leg injury, and he somehow made it to that event and talked to the Land O'Lakes staff that was there. And before that, I made it up to one of the FTC, the same FTC kickoff that Woody made it to. So Woody and I were both at the same FTC kickoff that was hosted at University of Minnesota. That was quite an impactful trip. So it's like anytime you get to spend time with Woody, it's. I mean, obviously, rest in peace, Woody. It was just a great trip.
Yeah.
I'll just put in a plug for AndyMark. They've been a partner with us forever. Mark Coors was our first FTA when we had our very first event.
Right.
And AndyMark supplied a number of FTAs until we got our own guys trained. And they also supplied the field for our first state championship and some of our off-season events. So, we've had a long-term relationship with AndyMark, supplying things that aren't in the catalog necessarily. And, recently, for those of you that know about the practice fields that we have around the state, AndyMark supplied those also. So it's been a great partnership over the years.
Thanks, Mark. We really appreciate you folks as cheerleaders for us. That's very nice, and as wonderful customers. So thank you very much.
And Andy, we do have another question, but we are really at time. I need to queue up the next presenter. So
Okay.
would it be appropriate for this individual to reach out to you directly?
Yeah, you can send an email, Andy@AndyMark.com, or yeah, just Andy@AndyMark.com. Pretty simple. Send me an
Okay.
email, ask questions.
Okay,
Let's talk.
very good. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya.
Okay,